Even without the preseason, Michael Penix and the Falcons are primed for a blazing start this regular season.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Now, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as an everydayer. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day, and all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. In today's episode, we are talking about the 2 latest additions to the Falcons roster and what we will expect from them come Friday night against the Dallas Cowboys in the preseason finale. We'll give you some injury updates and what that potentially means for later this week against the Cowboys, as well as potentially next week when final roster decisions will have to be made and how players coming back or not coming back from injuries could impact those roster decisions. But first, we got to talk about, the thing that got everybody in a tizzy, because Raheem Morris said on Monday that Michael Penix nor Kirk Cousins is going to be playing this Friday in the preseason finale against the Dallas Cowboys. I saw a lot of people frustrated online with Michael Penix not playing in the preseason. Now, Raheem confirmed that on Monday. We've known for a while here on this illustrious podcast that Penix was not going to play in the preseason. He basically said as much without saying explicitly, I will not be playing in the preseason, but he basically implied it 2 weeks ago. And we had a conversation about it 2 weeks ago on the podcast. And we talked about how, whether or not we were going to get to see these guys play in the preseason was going to be a pretty big storyline, even though we already knew what was going to happen. Right. The other 2 storylines that were the top 3 storylines entering training camp besides playing in the preseason was, what would Michael Penix be, as well as what would some of these rookies and second-year players that did not play last year that are essentially rookies, what would they be? We gave the rookie report on yesterday's episode on those rookies. We'll have some more Penix-centric content coming your way as the week unfolds. But, 2 weeks ago, or 13 days, I guess, to be exact, we talked a lot about the connections and correlations between playing guys in the preseason, at least your starting quarterback, and the tendency that teams tend to start faster that do so, and that there's this pattern/trend over the past decade, specifically with the Falcons, as well as other teams, that the more they play guys in the preseason, the better they tend to start the regular season, at least over the first 4 games. And I'll link to that episode if you want to hear that in its full context, or I'll try to remember to link to that episode in the description below. I often say, I'll link to that, and then I don't forget about adding that in the description. But, the question I have today is, how fast a start can we realistically expect this team, especially given that they're not going to be playing guys in the preseason? And so hypothetically, that means they're going to get off to a slow start. But, that we know kind of what the Falcons could be in the first 4 weeks of the season, because we're very familiar with the Falcons against those 4 teams, because they're all rematches from last year, right? Week 1 against Tampa Bay, week 2 against Minnesota, week 3 against Carolina, week 4 against Washington, before that week 5 bye. And the Falcons played a total of 6 games against those 4 opponents last year, and they averaged 31 points per game across those 6 games. And can they repeat that same success this year? Is that realistic for this year's version of the team? And normally I'd be the guy that comes on here and be like, hey guys, let's pump the brakes and all that stuff. And I'm not doing it today. Okay. Because we're pumping Penix, baby. And especially, over the last 6 months, the world has been convincing me that every single problem for this Atlanta Falcon team in 2024 stemmed from Kirk Cousins. And now that we have Michael Penix at quarterback, that's going to be a tremendous upgrade at the quarterback position, not to mention my guy, Zach Robinson. As well, we're leading the Z-Rob Zealots, right? In Zach we trust, right? Year 2 of Zach Robinson, he too is going to be tremendous. And so if we scored 31 points a game against these same teams with Kirk Cousins, just imagine how many points we're going to score with Michael Penix. 34, 44, 54. It's just, the possibilities are endless. And so, the reason why we're going to need this team to potentially score that many points, because if you look at those 6 games and see how many points the Falcons gave up in those 6 games, they gave up 32 points a game. So, hopefully the defense is improved, but they're probably going to need to score some points. And so we're going to need Michael Penix in this offense to really get off to a fast start. I'm sorry. And so, we're going to need this team to be dropping 30 burgers every single week to start this regular season. And, typically, again, I'd be the person like, hey, you can't put those expectations on a first-year starting quarterback or anything like that with some of these pieces and whatnot. But no, I think it's completely reasonable for the Falcons to expect to drop 30 burgers coming out the gates, right? And that's one of the reasons why they've deemed that, hey, it's not necessary for us to play guys in the preseason because we don't get off the slow starts, right? Raheem said this last week to the media when he was asked specifically about the Bengals' decision to play their starters, and basically said, hey, that's their choice because they've gotten off to some slow starts and they feel like they will get off to a faster start if they play their guys in the preseason. But I'm not worried about that because we don't get off to slow starts. And I was like, Raheem, your definition and my definition of what a slow start is very different, right? Now, we know Raheem's definition is not based off of stats because we've heard Raheem say many, many times, stats are for losers. And we discussed last year going into the season how the Falcons need to get off to a fast start. We talked about how they needed to go 2-2 in the first month of the season, and they did so. And so I think Raheem is basically saying, mission accomplished. So, if you go beyond the wins and losses, they did get off to a slow start. But again, stats are for losers, through those first 4 games. In terms of explosive plays, it was the lowest number of 20-plus yard plays that the Falcons had generated in their first 4 games combined over the last 15 years. They averaged about 19 points per game, which was the 3rd lowest point total across their first 4 games in the last 10 years. And, that 19 points includes 2 scores against the Saints in week 4 that were not by the offense on, pick 6 from Torrey Anderson, fumble recovery touchdown on special teams by Kadero Hodge. And if you remove those out of the sample, they only averaged about 15 points per game, which would have been the lowest average start for this Falcons offense in the last 10 years. So, despite those stats and all the losers that, cite those stats, the pressure is certainly going to be on this team. There's only been 4 times in the last 30 years that the Atlanta Falcons have averaged 30 or more points in their first 4 games, all coming during the prime years of Matt Ryan. 2012, they averaged 31 points, 2014, 33 points, 2015, 34 points, 2016, 38 points. They also averaged 29 points in 2018, so almost got there. But all of those were prime years, And so the pressure is now on, Michael Penix to perform like a prime Matt Ryan, right? Young Matt Ryan wasn't doing this. Young Matt Ryan, prime Matt Ryan had Julio Jones, and Michael Penix, we got Drake London. So we're good there, right? So same thing, right? So, of course, Michael Penix will perform at this high level. It's very reasonable to expect that. We have Jarvis Davis himself, the most reasonable person that we know out here pushing, 26, 27, 28, 29. I think, when we get Jarvis on later this week on the podcast, he'll be like, yeah, 30 points. That's the expectation for this football team. And again, if Jarvis expects that, then everybody should expect that because, again, Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta is the most reasonable person that we all know. So, I think if he has those expectations, we all should have those expectations. If they don't get off to a fast start, then, there will absolutely be no second guessing of this regime for the second year in a row where this coaching staff, talks the talk and doesn't necessarily walk the walk. But we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about crossing that bridge when we get to it, 6+ weeks from now. So don't worry about it. This Falcons team is going to be off to the races. And again, entirely reasonable that they're going to do that because, again, if they could score 31 points with Kirk, they absolutely can score 34 points with Michael Penix. So we will see if the Falcons live up to those reasonable expectations in the coming weeks and months. But we will continue today's Locked On Falcons talking about the injury updates that we got from Raheem Morris and how that may impact some of these roster decisions. Could the Falcons be in the market for a new swing tackle or, some cornerback depth or whatever the case may be. So we'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So August 26th is officially a brand new holiday. It is FanDuel Futures Day. This is the perfect holiday for all the football fans who live for the bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you all the deals you need on NFL season predictions. So whether you want to call your shot on winning the MVP, who wins the MVP, which could be Michael Penix Jr., or eyeing that long shot division winner, or you're ready to crown this year's Super Bowl champ before week one even kicks off, this is your moment. So celebrate FanDuel Futures Day. And if you're feeling bullish on the Falcons in 2025, you'll have opportunities, or whoever you're feeling bullish on heading into this season. This is the day to celebrate and win some cash. Head on over to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today, and you can start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. So we got some injury updates on various players from Raheem Morris. No setbacks on Darnell Mooney, so we're still on track for that one. As I said when he first got hurt, we'll see in September if he's healthy. That's basically, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But there will be some growing concern if we don't hear next week that he's ramping up. He's coming back and he's ramping up. But again, we'll cross that bridge if and when we get to it. Jalen Walker, dealing with the groin injury, will be held out on Monday, but should be back later this week. So that's a good sign. Kick returner Jamal Agnew did have a setback with his oblique, but was in practice on Monday. And so the team is still very optimistic that he'll be good to go by week one. Offensive tackle Storm Norton is dealing with an undisclosed lower leg injury. Cornerback Clark Phillips with a rib injury, and running back Carlos Washington with a hamstring are not expected back to practice this week. And then cornerback Kobe Bryant, who's dealing with a hamstring, as well as cornerback Keith Taylor, also dealing with a hammy, and edge rusher Khalid Kareem, who's dealing with a groin, are all expected back to practice this week. And so how does that affect these potential impending roster battles on the back end of the roster? Walker has little to no impact. Agnew's entrenched as a kick returner, so his absence is just going to give Natron Brooks more opportunities to show his versatility, in addition to him, being on defense, also on special teams. Storm Norton is the more interesting one, because if we are not sitting here saying he's going to be on track to be healthy for week one as the Falcons swing tackle, that raises some concerns, because Jack Nelson is not ready to be the swing tackle. Brandon Parker is not ready to be the swing tackle. I'm probably not going to make the team. And basically, we're really counting on Elijah Wilkinson to sort of clean up all the issues he had this past Friday against the Titans, this coming Friday against the Cowboys. And if he doesn't, then the Falcons are absolutely going to need to go shopping for a new swing tackle, which is not the first time that the Falcons have gone shopping. That's how Storm Norton got here back in 2023, and go all the way back to the Ty Sambrailo trade in 2017. Like, this is not new. If you've been an everyday of the Locked On Falcons podcast for 8-ish years, where it always seems like every summer we're going into like, hey, we need a swing tackle because we don't draft and develop guys on day 3. But again, we're not going to get into that on today's episode. But that is something that we'll keep an eye on, right? Basically, as the next week or so unfolds. But with Carlos Washington out, this RB3 competition is wide open, right? We saw Nathan Carter do his best to make a bid there, but as we discussed on yesterday's episode, it's not just who's the best running back, but it's going to be pass protection. It's going to be special teams that are going to be impacting that position. So that's going to be a prime situation come Friday against the Cowboys, or else that's another position that the Falcons could go shopping for off the waiver wire. And there's a couple of running backs out there that are, allegedly on the roster bubble that I'm like, that's interesting, but we might get into more of those guys as the week unfolds. But, Kobe Bryant coming back for this week's practice is a good sign, because this Dallas game is really his last shot to make a firm push to make the roster. and live up to the billing as the greatest undrafted free agent of all time. Clark Phillips not coming back really does put him in danger of being cut, right? And part of me wants to be petty and do a victory lap, because when I questioned this pick 2 years ago, a lot of people were like, "Oh, well, Aaron, you don't know what you're talking about," but it's one of those things is like, we'll see what Clark does, right? At the time I was like, Clark is too small and too slow to play outside and not physical enough to play inside and doesn't play special teams. And so I'm just sitting here going like, what's the upside of this draft pick? But everybody was convinced that, we got a steal in round 4. And I'm just like, we got a 4th round talent in round 4, but it is what it is. But, to Clark Phillips's credit, when he's gotten opportunities to play on the field, he's been a solid backup off the bench, which is not something you can really say about the rest of the cornerback room, right? Because they don't have too many of those guys that you can say are proven options in this cornerback room. You're like, it's AJ Terrell, it's Mike Hughes, and that's about it, right? Billy Bowman and Natron Brooks right now look like they're going to be on the roster. They're unproven. Kobe Bryant, who a lot of people think is going to be on the roster, he's unproven, right? And then you have Mike Ford, who's just bad, right? At least as far as playing defense. And so for that reason, once Clark Phillips gets healthy, I've just sort of been assuming, and talked about this, I think, on yesterday's episode as well, that like when he comes back healthy, he'll have a roster spot waiting for him, just because the Falcons need to have a proven option in terms of their cornerback depth. But we'll have to sort of see on that. If he doesn't come back anytime soon, then maybe we'll see him go on the IR and be on the short-term IR. And then the Falcons say, okay, well, get healthy, Clark, and we'll see you in 4 weeks to start the regular season. That may also be an option, or they could just move on, and, that will become a lot easier if a guy like Kobe Bryant or CJ Henderson or any of these other guys besides Natron Brooks, get the opportunity or take advantage of the opportunity that they're going to get on Friday night against the Cowboys and potentially steal Clark Phillips's job as potentially the CB6 on this team. So we will see who or what will come of that opportunity and who can take advantage of that opportunity, if anybody. So that will be an ongoing conversation here on Locked On Falcons. But, thinking about what's going to happen on Friday in this preseason finale against the Cowboys, there are 2 new additions to the Falcons roster that could potentially make an impact and potentially win opportunities, maybe not necessarily to make the roster, but potentially to steal a practice squad spot. So we'll talk about the new quarterback and new pass rushers the Falcons added on Monday as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So have you ever decided last minute, it's a beautiful day out there, sunny, the clouds are out, all that stuff. And it's like, man, it's a great day to go down to the ballpark, whether with friends or family. Well, you can with Gametime, because they're the perfect place to go for those killer last minute deals. And with the money that you save on the tickets with Gametime, you can then splurge on the food, drinks, and merch, or even, invite a few more friends and family with you. Gametime makes it all possible, because they make buying tickets fast and simple, whether it's sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you, because the prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to your first pitch or the start of your event. And, they've got those incredible last minute deals, those clear panoramic seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that's going to take the worry out of buying. And if you're worried about the hassle of having to scroll through a bunch of seats in order to find the best deal, Gametime Zone Deals is going to pick the best seat in your section for you. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime by downloading the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So the Falcons made 2 roster moves on Monday, signing quarterback Ben DiNucci and edge rusher Ronnie Perkins. And to clear the way for those 2 new additions, they cut DJ Chark, the wide receiver, and waived injured quarterback Emory Jones, which means that if he clears waivers, which he almost certainly will, he'll go to the injured reserve list, right? And I should clarify, I think I said on a recent episode that if you get put on IR before final cuts, you're done for the season. That used to be the old rule, and they changed the rule last year, I think. And I forgot that they changed the rule. And so I think it's 2 players that you can designate as eligible to return if you put them on IR before the final cuts. I think that's the rule, but I'll double check that before we get to next Tuesday's cuts and whatnot. And Emory Jones obviously got injured on Friday night against the Titans, suffering a head injury late in that game. And we'll see what happens with Emory Jones. I think he's a talented, physically quarterback with a good arm and mobility, but I feel like the decision-making, the accuracy, even before his injury, has not really been on display in these preseason games, and his real value at this stage in his NFL career without significant development in terms of accuracy and decision-making is really just kind of a scout team quarterback that plays for, instead of for athletic quarterbacks in practice that week, which is why the Falcons originally picked him up back in week 17 ahead of that game against the Commanders and Jaden Daniels. And like, he could still be handy for those games because we got plenty of those guys on the schedule, like Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, Drake May, Justin Fields, Anthony Richardson, possibly if we are in Germany, Kyler Murray, as well as some of these guys that are athletic and whatnot. But beyond that, I don't know if Emory Jones is ready to be a backup quarterback in this league, kind of being a one read and kind of scramble type of quarterback. And to me is the type of guy that really needs to go to like the UFL or CFL for a couple of years. And then like, hey, 3 years from now, let's circle back and see where your development is at that point in time. But we'll see on that front. Now, DJ Chark, when he first got signed at the start of training camp because of the injury to Darnell Mooney, we thought, hey, that guy has a legit shot of, winning a backup spot. But then Casey Washington emerged. We've seen Chris Blair emerge. David Sills has also emerged. And those are the guys that really took advantage of Mooney's absence. And now, Chark didn't really make the impact despite his veteran experience. And so, he was a player that was contemplating retirement before, giving one last crack with this Falcon team. And I imagine he'll probably decide to retire at this point in time. So we'll see what happens with DJ Chark. Now, talking about the new additions, Ben DiNucci, Pitt legend, finished his career at JMU, but, began his career at the University of Pittsburgh. And we know that all great quarterbacks begin their career at the University of Pittsburgh, especially the ones that leave, Luke Getsy, Joe Flacco, incredible specimens and whatnot. But he's going to give you that fourth arm to replace Emory Jones in this Dallas game. He'll likely get limited opportunities, probably in the fourth quarter. So we'll probably see a lot of Easton Stick like we just saw this past Friday against the Titans, which I'm sure some of you guys are lamenting, but it's music to my ears because we get to push the Easton Stick hype for at least one more week, and hopefully he lives up to the hype. But hey, we always have that Lions game, right? We can always, even if Easton Stick falls flat on his face, we'll be like, hey man, that Lions game though was a thing of beauty. When it comes to Ben DiNucci, his claim to fame was he was basically the QB3 for like 3 years behind Dak Prescott and Cooper Rush from like 2020 to 2022. Then he got an opportunity to play with Seattle in the XFL in 2023. Played well, relatively speaking. But since then, since leaving Dallas, has kind of bounced around the league with multiple teams and been on various practice squads. And so essentially, if I'm paying attention to his PFF grades, because I haven't watched that much Ben DiNucci since his last year at Pitt, which was 2017, and a handful of preseason games, 3-4 years ago. You look at his PFF grades, like he's kind of a gunslinger, right? He's a guy that typically has a high turnover worthy play rate, right? He led the XFL in that season with Seattle in both big time throws and turnover worthy plays. So we'll see if, he can be out there slinging and whatnot. But, 1 week of practice, you're not expecting him to be able to master this offense. And we kind of went through this last year with, CFL legend Nathan Rourke, who came in, played in, I think, the second preseason game or the first preseason. I can't remember which game it was. Struggled. And then the Falcons were like, okay, let's bring John Paddock back. Let's get the guy that knows the offense so that we can execute our offense, so that we can evaluate some of these guys. But it does feel a little bit like the Falcons kind of know what they are at wide receiver. So we might see if and when Ben DiNucci gets in the game late, we might see the Falcons really focus on the run game. And that will just be like, we're just going to run out the clock. And last year, that was definitely the case when they got the brakes beat off of them by the Jaguars. I think they lost that game like 31 or 34-0. And so they were just like, okay, like this is done. So we'll see if we get a repeat of that against Joe Milton and the boys on Friday. But Ronnie Perkins, third round pick originally for the Patriots back in 2021 out of Oklahoma, spent his first 2 years in New England kind of nicked up. I know he finished his rookie season on IR with an ankle injury, was put on IR before his second season even began. Landed with the Broncos in his third NFL season in 2023. Did play 7 games for them, didn't really do a whole lot for them. In 2024, he was on the Cardinals practice squad, played for Birmingham in the UFL this past spring, and got off to a good start before another injury kind of derailed the season, but had 3.5 sacks and 19 pressures in 5 games before getting hurt again. And so I think his signing is getting you another body on the defensive line. We talked about that 2 weeks ago that, when the Falcons were working out all these various players, that they were likely to potentially bring in some bodies on the defensive line because they were relatively thin there. And this to me kind of signals that we probably aren't going to see Jalen Walker. We probably aren't going to see James Pierce on Friday. I suspect that we'll see 4 edges in this game, getting pretty much all the snaps. That'll probably be the guys at the bottom of the roster, which will include Braylon Trice, D'Angelo Malone, Khalid Kareem, and Ronnie Perkins at this stage. So Perkins will get plenty of opportunities to show what he's got. Show me what you got. And so we'll see what he's got, if he can get swifty or not in this Cowboys game. And I know some of you guys get that reference, and the other people are like, what are you talking about? And I appreciate those of you that get that reference. We can be friends in real life. But, I think we'll see, if Trice does play, I think he'll get a quick hook. And at some point Malone will get a quick hook. And so it'll be interesting to see, because the Falcons are like, oh, we're only going to play guys 4 snaps and then you're out of there and we're just have a deep rotation. And then for the preseason finale, it's like, nah, man, you're going to play all the snaps. Right? For some of these guys, like, you're not going to get any breathers. You're going to play every single snap as much as possible. I'll be curious. To me, the thing that's going to be interesting to see is if Arnold Ebiketie plays, because that will indicate that the team does not see Arnold Ebiketie in the same way that, the rest of the world, or maybe I shouldn't say the rest of the world. I should say, the ball knowers out there, folks like yours truly and whatnot that, just have their finger on the pulse and whatnot. So I'll be curious if he's inactive in this game, and we'll see, with some of these guys. My suspicion is that because they're so thin in terms of roster spots, like, we will see some of these guys for, like, I don't know, a series or 2, maybe a quarter or whatever. So it'll be fascinating to see how the snaps sort of break down on Friday night, because it's I think they played about 55 players against the Titans. And I think we talked about this earlier this summer, where in the preseason finale against the Jaguars last year, they played about 51 players. So it's like, there's only, you kind of need at least 50 guys to get through a game. Right. That's kind of the rule, or 48 guys, I guess you could say, to get through a game. So there's only maybe a handful of players that they could truly sit in this upcoming game that played last week. So they'll have to be kind of selective on that end. So it'll be interesting to see how the Falcons handle that. And that will tell us a lot on sort of some of these guys. Like, to me, a Natron Brooks is a classic example of a guy that if he's one of those potentially up to 7 players that sits on Friday against the Cowboys, then he's a roster lock. But again, they have plenty of injuries and whatnot. So we'll see who comes back and whatnot. But those are my thoughts on the new roster moves. Those are my thoughts on the injuries. And those are my thoughts on the incredible start that the Falcons will be having this upcoming season. And if you guys are sitting there going, Aaron, were you being sarcastic for the first 10 minutes of the show? It's like, no, I wasn't being sarcastic. The expectation is the bar is high, guys. Like there is no easing into the season, right? Everything's going to be great. And of course, because we pump all day long, we know it's going to be great. That's not sarcasm, guys. That's me being 100. Look at my face, guys. I'm being 100% serious. This is my serious face. Okay. I'm being 100%. They don't call me Serious Black if I wasn't serious. I'm serious all the time. They are going to get off to a brilliant start. And we know that because, again, the confidence that Raheem Morris is showing. It's like, we don't get off the slow starts, guys. Like, last year was not a slow start. Just because the offense only averaged 15 points a game doesn't mean anything. Did we win the games? Did we win the games? So that's all that matters. So that's all that matters. So they'll get off to a fast start again this year because Raheem backs up everything he says. So I don't know why there's any doubt at all. Again, serious, being 100% serious. This is my serious face. So we will have more conversations about why Michael Penix is off to a brilliant start, but potentially beginning on tomorrow's episode. So to stay tuned for that, as well as keep you covered for all these as we lead up to this incredible Cowboys matchup, on Friday night. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Football Show, who's going to get you guys geared up for your fantasy football seasons. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.